How far would you go for a photograph? What are your limits? Would you do anything for an award-winning image? Have you ever cheated death to capture an image? What if you knew that one day your image would be on the cover of a magazine? Is it worth the risk? I mean, think about it. Have you ever seen a photograph that was so breathtaking that it just stopped you dead in your tracks? As landscape photographers, we often admire the work of others. Perhaps it's envy at times. In any case, it's human nature to compare ourselves to others. But what is it that drives one to take dubious risks for a photograph? Perhaps it's the competition of social media, or maybe it's just self-determination. Regardless, we often have high expectations that we occasionally meet, but sometimes we fall short. Nevertheless, setting challenging but realistic goals is truly the benchmark of a steadfast landscape photographer. And as the saying goes, nothing ventured, nothing gained. On the other hand, knowing one's limits is also essential for long-term success, as well as long-term well-being. Indeed, we live in an unprecedented time in human history. We are absolutely surrounded with information and technology. I mean, it's everywhere. Only a few short years ago, one would have to visit the local library to see a photograph of something like Half Dome in Yosemite National Park. Now that I think about it, unless you are a bookworm or maybe you're a local resident, you would likely have never heard of places like one of my favorites, the Red River Gorge in eastern Kentucky. However, nowadays, with a quick Google search, one can find information, photographs, and almost anything from anywhere in mere seconds. As landscape photographers, it's easy to see why people get discouraged. We often feel like the work is done and there's nothing left to photograph, so, well, we might as well just go home and find a new hobby or passion. However, some do look at this from a different perspective. They see it as a challenge, a quest to take it to the next level. So back to the original question, how far would you go for a photograph? Well, I obviously can't answer that for you. However, I can answer the question for myself. Although I do have goals and ambitions for my photography, I have 3 basic rules that I follow in every scenario. Number 1, I choose not to flirt with death. I don't take foolish and unnecessary risks. I'm not going to see how close I can get to the edge of a cliff just for the sake of a selfie. I mean, honestly, let's say with maturity, I've gotten a little wiser about things like that. Number 2, the greater the risk, the more planning and research I pour into the project. I'm a big proponent of planning and research, not just because I want to capture the best image possible, but because I want to be safe, and I want to know what I'm getting into before I get into it. And number 3, I make sure that someone always knows where I am. Although a Garmin inReach is a little bit of an investment, it's a handy tool if you get caught in a pinch. Also, it's a great tool for sending text messages and communicating my whereabouts to my wife. I activate tracking on some of the longer hikes, and she can kind of follow along with my every movement. So, what risks do I take, and how far will I go? Well, I'm not much of a sedentary landscape photographer. I'm not going to sit on my couch and take pictures from the living room. I love the outdoors, I love travel, and I think nature is our friend. But we have to have respect for the things that can bring us harm. With that in mind, I'm not opposed to hiking or backpacking for a couple of days into the heat or snow or rain. I'll crawl through a cave, swim, scuba dive, fly, or drive anywhere I need to be. I'll backpack into the forest, bushwhack through the woods, climb a hillside. I'll wade through a stream. I'll camp for days, and I'll wait for hours for the perfect light. But these things are not without some risks, and I do realize that I'm mostly alone in my travel, although if the risk is high enough, I will bring a friend or family member along for the ride. However, I do understand that I could fall from climbing. I could slip in a stream and drown or crack my head open. I could die from hypothermia. I could break a leg, or I could be eaten by a wild animal. And don't think about getting mauled by a bear. But snake bites, stumbling on a wasp or bee's nest, or getting sick from drinking putrid water from a stream, they're just no fun to think about, especially when you're 10 or 20 miles away from civilization. However, we can develop strategies to mitigate risk. Being aware of one's surroundings and taking proper precautions further reduce the likelihood of things like bear attacks or succumbing to the elements. You know, I've often said it's not the photography, but the experience that matters most. The truth is, I enjoy these things, and although my risk-taking may not be as perilous as climbing Everest, it is probably more than most people. I wouldn't consider myself a daredevil by any means. I'm sure the typical adventure seeker employs an entire rationale for their risk-taking behaviors. I'd like to think that I'm conscious of the risks that I do take. Indeed, there's always stories of someone falling to their death from taking a selfie or some other unfortunate circumstance. But, earlier I'd mentioned in the Red River Gorge in eastern Kentucky, every now and then you'll see a memorial there just right there at the trailhead. And despite the warning signs of fall hazards and everything else, these beautiful places, they still claim their fair share of victims. Also, I'm a frequent visitor of the Arkansas Ozark National Forest. One of my favorite things to do there is visit the local waterfalls. It's one of my favorite places, and I truly enjoy it, but even the waterfalls are not without risks. In fact, one of my go-to books is written by a gentleman named Tim Ernst. In his book, Arkansas Waterfalls, I read the tragic story of David Hadlock. David was photographing in the Ozark when he noticed a waterfall below Woodboys Falls. He made his way down a steep, icy slope, and honestly, I've been there and I've seen it, and it's pretty steep. Unfortunately, he slipped and fell to his death. Later, they recovered his camera with the images he'd made. The waterfall, or cascade, I should say, now bears his name, David Hadlock Cascade. I often think about David when I'm there. His tragic story serves to remind me that this could happen to anyone at any time. All this talk about hiking and nature, even photographing cityscapes and street photography are not without risk. Tourists sometimes get deprived of their camera gear while they're on vacation. On that note, I made a video about getting robbed. You may find this interesting, but I'll leave a link in the video description below. Unfortunately, life is not without risk. And not to be too bleak, but, my last day could be on my way to work tomorrow morning. Or something as simple as an accident while on a road trip on a vacation. However, there's much to be gained by taking a few calculated risks. With a bit of planning and research, we can do great things with a little precaution. And who knows, maybe come away with a stunning award-winning image. Now back to you. How far would you go for a photograph? Take a minute, drop me a comment, let me know your thoughts. Tell us your story and how far you're willing to go. What are your limitations? I really do enjoy reading the comments, and I respond to everyone. And I look forward to hearing your thoughts. And I hope you liked this video and found it useful. And if you did, hit that like button and consider subscribing to the channel. Also, don't forget to check out the video I mentioned on getting robbed. You may also want to check out my videos on the Red River Gorge and some of my Ozark trips. I'll leave a few links in the video description. If I don't see you down the road, maybe I'll see you on the trail.